and there's just so many tools that they have, right? And it's like, how do you manage and deal with everything that the world is throwing at kids today? So I think it really helps to let them know that, hey, your brain is a tool. It's a tool you can use to manage the outside world, as well as it's a tool you can, intentionally use to manage your inside world.
So now I'm using this incredible strategy to set my son up for success. And I am excited to see 10 years from now how this has helped him in his social experiences and in academic experiences, and seeing how that works. And that makes me feel alive and really excited, because I'm excited for him that he gets to learn this, because so many kids before this have not had the opportunity unless they were in our school.
Identify your general why. Why do you want that? Because you want to be more loving, you want to just be more giving and more uplifting. Welcome, I'm Yannick, and now joining me, Rick K. Cohen and Katie Upshaw, to discuss the newly published book, The Metacognitive Preschooler. Welcome, Katie and Rick Cohen, and of course Cohen Upshaw, to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate being here.
Yeah, so excited.
So let's start, and just start really so that we get a sense who you are. So who is Rick Cohen and Katie Upshaw in simply one sentence? So each of you get one sentence.
Okay, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
You after you.
So I'm Rick Cohen. I am husband, father of 3 kids, educator, school leader, and someone who loves fantasy football.
Oh, I don't know how to follow that up. Well, I'm Katie Upshaw, and I am a new mom, a preschool teacher, and a lifelong learner is how I would describe myself.
Beautiful. So, welcome to the show. It's so interesting, and I was really intrigued by the title and by really the feasibility of actually implementing this when it comes to preschoolers. So, that's a huge challenge in my view. So, when I just hear it, and while reading the book, I really got a sense how powerful actually the book is and how many advantages it actually entails in order to really accelerate learning and striving in school more broadly. So let's start by simply introducing metacognition.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways it's been defined. I think the way that we like to define it best is when you are aware of and able to manage your thinking and your feelings. A lot of times you hear about it's thinking about your thinking, but we always like to include feelings in that because, you can be very metacognitive about your emotions, and the management of it is very metacognitive as well.
And it sounds so important because today we live in a world where everything is about feelings, everything is about emotions in one way or another. And so it's really important that actually young kids learn to manage their emotions, feeling, and really thoughts. I think that's a whole other level now that we generally face in education, because it just goes so fast, and not even adults. Most adults are actually able, I would say, to properly manage their emotions, let alone social media. I mean, it says so much about the times we live in, let alone schools. And I mean, schools are also in many ways very political, and complicated, complex places to manage. So, give us a little bit a taste of how all this came into being? I know that I think you both work at the same school. So Rick Cohen is a principal of the school, and Katie Upshaw is a preschool educator. Am I right?
So that's how it started. Things Positions have changed a little bit for Rick, at least since we started working on structured self questioning in this book. But I mean, Rick and I started working together, I think almost 9 years ago at this point, when he hired me to work at the school I'm still at today. And when he came to me with this idea, I had a lot of students in my classroom and a lot of behaviors in my classroom. And I was like, there's no way. Like, there's no way you're not doing that. You're crazy. It's going to be too hard. I'm not going to be able to do it. And he was like, just, Katie, let's just do it. And we did. And we haven't turned back. And it's been an incredible experience. But Rick, he brought it to us, and it's been really life changing since we started using it, structured self questioning in the classroom, and this metacognitive strategy for our students.
Yeah, and I really appreciate Katie taking the lead because, when I came to her and said, hey, we can teach 3 and 4-year-olds, some of them very neurodiverse, a way in which they can really think about their thinking and manage their own behaviors despite any abilities or disabilities. Really took a leap of faith on her part to say, hey, we'll give this a shot. The research is powerful. It says, 3 and 4-year-olds can learn this. But as you said, Yanni, I really appreciate you saying about the feasibility. It was really taking some really solid research and just making it really feasible in the classroom and for parents as well at home. And because it is so feasible and it is so aligned with what we know how the brain works, that, it's almost amazing how easy it can be to take something, as you mentioned, like the world has, come so far recently, and preschool is really one of the more challenging places to work now. Kids, I've been a preschool aged principal for 18 years, and it was a slice of heaven. They were so sweet and cute all the time up until, around, especially now around COVID and after COVID. The kids, their regulation skills, their emotional coping skills, their emotions are more intense. Their reactions are more intense. Their tantrums are more intense. And so the idea that something so simple could be so effective was a little bit of a leap, I think, for people. So I really appreciated Katie taking that lead, trying it out, and we've seen amazing thing for her kids, which I think has really helped launch the rest of the work.
Yeah, and I'm also curious about how it was received within the school. I mean, there too, there is a lot of complexity because people have a lot of on their plates already. And if you add something like this, it sounds wonderful, no question, right? But it's another thing that people have to implement, that people have to learn, and that people really have to, at some point, embrace. So it takes a team, it takes a culture to really incorporate that. Did you, in one way or another, face challenges in this regard, or was it just top leadership and it just trickled down to the bottom?
No, I kind of love what you said about it taking a culture, because that was the approach that Rick took from like the leadership role and that I took from the teacher role. It was kind of building the buy-in to say, because initially I thought the same thing, right? I'm balancing 12 IEPs. I'm taking all this data. I don't need another thing on my plate, but it's not another thing on our plate. It's really just changing the language that we use when already solving the problems that we are working with our students, to make it more functional and to help build those neural pathways in the brain with the consistent use over time. And Rick never was like a top down leader. He really built the culture in our school by modeling. And as a leader, Rick modeled using this language with adults and would come in our classroom and model this language with our students. And we really built a classroom culture and a building culture around using this strategy, because the more models that we had in the building, the more students saw us talking about our feelings, it really, we saw a lot of progress with all of our students learning. Like Rick said, neurodiverse students included, everybody was able to learn this strategy and how to use it, maybe in their own way, but through all of the modeling and the culture that we built around it, it was really powerful to watch, and it continues to be.
And it's so great to hear Katie speak about that. We need to put a little asterisk next to her response because she's a self-admitted lifelong learner,
Yeah.
right? And so, you have teachers that fall into different categories, and some are lifelong learners like Katie, and you come with something new, and they'll get excited about it and they'll try it out, right? I'd say there's another group, which is one that needed to have some buy-in, right? And getting teachers to buy into taking some time to try to learn a new way in which to teach kids social and emotional skills is not a hard sell. I think they automatically know how important it is for our students to learn social and emotional learning as equal to, if not more important than some of the academic skills, whether that's preschool or high school and college and beyond. Where the real sort of push came is, there are people that are afraid of change, right? They're just afraid of doing something new and different. But so in getting them to make the leap, it was a combination of, letting them see teachers that were trying it like Katie and the success they were having with with the students. But then, as she said, modeling it. Like I had to show that this was not just something that we thought was a gimmick or, sell as a buzzword. Let's try this new thing with kids, but it's something that we valued ourselves as adults at work. And so we would, at every staff meeting, use the same strategy that we were trying to teach the students with us as amongst the staff in order for us to be able to identify how we were feeling as a staff, how we could support each other as a staff, how we could manage those emotional stressors at work. Being a teacher today is as stressful as any job that exists today, right? And so, in having teachers practice the strategy themselves and seeing the impact it had on them and their emotional well-being, and helping them to perform at their best, they sort of it was easy to get everybody to sort of get on board and say, okay, we can see the value that this would have for students because of our experience with it.
Yeah, I'm really, really glad to hear that. And I also have to give a shout out actually to Solution Tree because it's really solution oriented. And I think that's something that I really appreciate also in this book, right? It's not so much always problematizing certain um, issues in schools or certain challenges, but rather really looking at the opportunity in order to create solutions in order to improve learning and teaching as a whole. So I think this is really, really important. Now, one thing I was also thinking was the fact that you also develop these resources also for parents. So it was really um, not just the student, but it was parents are also involved. So they also get the skills and learn and will learn how to interact differently with their kids at home when certain challenges arise. So I'm curious about how it was received from the parents when you came up to them and suggested that this might be a valuable addition to besides of their already very busy schedules. I think we all know parents today, it's really tough, and partly why kids are really hooked up on cell phones, in my view, is simply because it's really hard to find time for your kids and to give them the attention that they actually need, but they can't give them because of so many obvious reasons, right?
So, so I'm going to let Katie give some specific examples, which are great, where you can see how that partnership with parents came about and the impact it has. I'll just say in general, we're finding a lot of receptiveness to parents, and why we decided to add a parent component to the book is because parents today are wondering how can they help their child. Um, you know, as we discussed earlier, those emotions of their young ones are stronger than ever at times, and they are looking for something that they can do that may be different from the way they were raised or how their parents had helped them when they were young deal with emotions. And so I think they were hungry for something, and then again, because it's so feasible, it makes it very practical, not just in the classroom, but in the home. And there was a natural partnership between the teacher and the parent working as a team with one strategy for their child. So to that end, I'll pass it on to Katie, who can tell you a little bit more about the specifics and get you a little a real sense of what it looks like, what success looks like.
Yeah, I mean, we know as educators that like the continuity between home and school is so important. So if we're using strategies at school, it's beneficial to use these strategies at home, and they might look different in the way that you use them. But the great thing about structured self-questioning is that the language always stays the same. It might just be the context in which it's used that's different. School situations are different from home situations sometimes. So, encouraging parents to use this language at home in the situations that they face um, allows students the opportunity to recognize the language that they've heard at school and understand, okay, this is how I can solve this problem. This is how I can find a solution to what I'm looking for. Now, at the preschool level, I'm working with kids 3 to 5 years old. And during COVID, we got a real glimpse into families' homes. Doing a Zoom call with a 3-year-old and trying to keep them engaged is not only a challenge for the teacher on this end, but also a challenge for the parent on the other end who has to sit there and assist in engaging their child in these activities. So that was really when we saw firsthand how important the continuity in using this strategy is. Because I have one student specifically that comes to mind. I have some students who engage in some self-harm behaviors. And this can be incredibly challenging for both myself, for the student, for the parents to witness. And it's incredibly hard to come up with a strategy to support the student in what they need because these behaviors, all behaviors, are communication. What does this student need? What do you need in this moment? So I had a student who began to engage in a behavior via a Zoom call. And the parent said, "How do you feel?" And he said, "I feel sad." And then the parent said, "Well, what can you do?" And he said, "I need 100 hugs." And when I tell you that dad followed through with all 100 of those hugs, it was something to see. And the dad was, from my perspective, and the son was hugging him and he was giving me the thumbs up. And I was like, this is incredible because this parent was struggling with having behaviors at home and we were not having behaviors at school at this point. And I was like, just try it. Just ask this question. Just change your language a little bit. And it was in that moment that we saw the buy-in. And this parent then talked to other parents about how important it was. And all parents started asking us about it. And it was incredible to see how this small moment had such a huge impact.
Yeah, that's so powerful, Mr. Cohen. If you have anything to add, but this is fantastic. I think that's you can't really hope for more, right? If you see an example like this, so
Yeah.
let's deconstruct it a little bit. So structured self questioning, and you have an acronym too, which is basically self. So please unpack this for us, what you actually mean by that, and walk us through a specific example. I mean, you just mentioned one, but
No, happily. So yeah, so we'll start maybe with the smallest chunk of the kind of name we've given this would be in the stuff called self cue, right? So there's a few play with the letters. It would be capital SEL in the self, of course, for social emotional learning. And then the Q, dash Q, is for questioning. It's a first letter for questioning, but it also can be used as a Q, as in CUE, as cue or a prompt, right? And so the idea is that self cueing is a way of self prompting your thinking through a strong emotion, through a social problem, personal problem, or an academic problem. And the key behind that is this is where the research comes from the field of psychology that says you really want to teach anyone really good problem solving and decision making. The idea is that you give them a strategy to guide their self talk. Now, the research from the field of psychology, of course, so much of that is there's a therapist or a counselor or a teacher guiding others self talk by prompting with you questions like, how do you feel? What can you do? Right. And so, working with the researchers themselves, saying, what if we were to if we want something to guide self talk, but the adult can't always be there? The teacher can't always be with the child. The parent can't always be with the child. If who's going to guide their self talk if when the adult's not there? And so the idea became, how do we turn this into something that students could use to structure their own thinking through multi-step problem solving and prompt and guide their self-talk through each step of the way. So it became structured, self-questioning that was in the first person, where students can ask themselves if they can internalize and memorize the questions by using it on a regular basis. Now they really do have a strategy that they can use to guide their own self-talk through any challenge, any context, any academic content area, anytime.
Yeah, and to me, this is also so practical, even for adults. I mean, if you already get this really in preschool, I mean, let alone the positive impact it has when you are an adult, because it's not just preschooler who have some challenges with regulating themselves, but also adults in so many ways, right? And I think it doesn't necessarily get any better when we look at the future, because everything gets so more focused online, and there's so much. It's just the technology behind these social media are just so powerful that you end up in a rabbit hole, right? And that's really powerful. So I'm curious about how you, when you were a kid, how you, if at all, self-regulated. And if you compare to today, of course, you said like today, of course, because of the obvious reasons, the issues are much more prevalent potentially. But how did you self-regulate when you were a kid, especially in preschool and elementary school?
That's a great question. And I have to think pretty far back. And I think that, we were fortunate. I was fortunate to grow up in a time where we didn't have social media. So I'm grateful for that because as an adult, Rick and I have talked a lot about the adult side of structured self-questioning. And I've found myself as an adult using this a lot when it does come to kind of like finding that downtime where you're doing like engaging in mindless, scrolling through social media. So I have as an adult found myself using this strategy. And I wish I had it when I was in elementary school and preschool because I was a child whose parents were divorced when they were in elementary school, and I was going through a lot. And my outlet was sport, um, and being outside, which is something I think a lot of our kids lack nowadays because, like you mentioned, parents are so busy, and a lot of our students are in daycare until well into the evening. So it can be challenging to find that time to just get outside and play. So I feel like that was my self-management tool when I was younger was just getting outside. We only had one TV in the house. My mom really made sure that we were not on it. She was very good about that. So we were outside until it got dark. And I think that was how, my brother and I had to regulate growing up is like, all right, well, here we are outside. We're feeling bored. What can we do? We spent plenty of time climbing trees. So I think that was how we regulated when we were younger, but I do see kind of the lack of that in our students today and almost the need for that as well.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. I think Katie hit on the head for me as well. Just many, many hours being outside, my neighborhood with friends. And, so many times we had to make up the games and the rules ourselves. And you learn a lot about how to work with others, recognize your own emotional, attachments to maybe the rule or your preferences, and recognize when maybe you've pushed too hard and now no one wants to play with you for the moment, right? And you have to sit back and think, well, did I push too hard? Right. And so we were sort of forced to do that all the time. We were sort of stuck together because we didn't have really stimulating TV. The TV shows when I was younger weren't that fun. So, by necessity, we learned how to regulate ourselves. We didn't go too far so that nobody would exclude us from play. And that we learned pretty quickly that the more and more we were in control of our emotions and everyone was having fun together, the happier everybody was. And so now that's why this work is so much even more important now because those play dates just aren't the same. Kids are spending a lot of time on screens. They are spending a lot of time at home. There's a lot less interaction even in the home between family members. And so a lot of that, like finding out your passions and what's too far and what people's boundaries are and how they feel and their perspectives and all that isn't coming naturally anymore. Now it has to be explicitly taught in schools, and students have to be almost trained to start recognizing and thinking about these things because we're not for it to be done at school. Kids would go through life, often unaware of the impact of their emotions and or the feelings of others because they're just not really forced to have to do that with they're spending a lot of time on a screen.
Yeah, it's I really hear you, because what I also see is that, and you actually also mentioned in the book that really play is one of the most important aspects of actually developing your brain and just your whole being, right? And if this is not the case, what's happened is that it's just simply a chemical imbalance. And I personally think when I look at what's going on, generally speaking, this confusion in so many ways when it comes to identity or whatever, most of it in my view is really due to the fact because there is a lack of exercising. You have to be outside, you have to experience nature, and you have to be creative. And I think with action, with movement, then there is where creativity comes in, right? Because everything in emotion is ultimately created through uh, emotion, right? It comes from the very word, it comes from emotion. So and so if we do neglect this whole aspect of really being and living and striving and learning, then I think it's just we are just playing a catch up game in one way or another. Of course, then we have the other challenges that what do we do with the kids? Because as you said, right, a lot they go in after school programs, let's say, or don't really move, as they ought to. So there are huge challenges for schools, for societies at large. And when I think about this, also when I look at, in 10, 20, 30 years, you kind of get worried because there's so many challenges there where we face now, and at some point, um, the youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow. So, and therefore, I'm really, really happy that you do this important work, really, to help people also to just become more self-aware. And you beautifully mentioned in the book, CEO of your brain. Really, you gotta become the CEO of your brain, because it's ultimately you who control it and who controls also the response. It's not the stimuli that determine your response, but it's actually something in between. And so talk a little bit more about the CEO of the brain and why it is so important, because again, you have a very holistic view of this, and it really means that the brain, the heart, and mind is somehow in alignment. So just let's start maybe with Rick Cohen and then Katie, how you see that.
Yeah, there's a couple reasons why it's just been so clear that we have to empower kids to become the CEOs of their own brains, their own thinking, their own brain functioning. On one end, it could be as simple as, kids are so much more dependent on the adults to manage day-to-day stressors. Uh, asking for the parents to get taken care of a lot of, little things that we as kids had to figure out ourselves. And bringing that to the school as well in the classroom, where little day-to-day things like, my pencil broke, and now it's going to the teacher and saying, what do I do? And it's becoming very hard for teachers nowadays to be able to meet all the needs that kids are coming in with, because they're less autonomous problem solvers, and they're less independent when it comes to dealing with their own emotions. And by leaning so much on the adults in every way, we're now finding a teacher shortage, right? And parents at a loss, and what to do and how to teach their kids, and all of that becomes really stressful for the adults. And the more and more this occurs, you have less and less empathy, and then less and less support for students, and it's a downward spiral. So, you know, one ways a lot of schools are currently handling this is they're trying to bring in and hire more school counselors. And a lot of schools are spending an extensive amount of money of their budget to provide in-school therapists, right? And address the need through more of a counseling approach, which is effective. And schools should do that. The problem is that the rate of mental health concerns is growing and growing and increasing and becoming more extreme. And the money that a lot of schools have been using to hire in-school therapists, a lot of that is coming from COVID money, federal money that came from the government through ESSER funding, which is now all going to be running out this year. So schools are going to need a solution that doesn't require a therapist for every student that projects these mental health needs and concerns. So the idea that if you can empower, especially with a practical, feasible, low cost, almost no cost strategy whatsoever to empower a much higher percent of students to be able to deal with that themselves with less support, then the idea would be not only is that going to be a great benefit to kids so that they truly become independent in terms of coping skills and in terms of being autonomous problem solvers, which is great in every aspect of life, but it hopefully should make it much more pleasant to be a teacher again, where, to be a teacher means a lot more posing the right questions to kids and getting them to become really, really, independent. And the idea that we can hopefully maybe reduce the amount of therapists that we need at schools for the kids to be able to make it just through the day.
No, I agree. And, coming back to the CEO part, as the teacher, I see this as giving our students the flexibility and the tools they need to be independent problem solvers. Really teaching them how to ask themselves these questions, understanding their emotions in that moment and what they can do about that emotion. Sometimes we come to school sad and we have to make it through the whole day sad. And we still have to make decisions and we still have to interact with our friends and we have to understand how to ask ourselves, okay, I'm feeling sad in this moment. What can I do? What can I do to make it to lunch? What can I do to make it through the end of the day? And those might be different strategies, and that's okay. But when we're giving students the tools that they need to be able to problem solve their own emotions and really make them the CEOs of their own brain, we are, like Rick said, we're making teachers' jobs just much easier. It's one less problem we have to solve. And one of my greatest joys is when I get to watch this as a teacher, where I get to stand on the outside and watch my students ask themselves these questions and then problem solve and then maybe try that strategy. And then that strategy might not work. So then they know they can try another one because that all comes with being in charge of managing your own emotions and your responses to those emotions. And like Rick said, a lot of this funding is running out and there's not going to be any money to hire outside professionals. And one of the co-authors of our book is a speech therapist, and she uses our structured self questions in all of her sessions. So not only is there then continuity between the classroom and the service providers, but also home as well. So we have a whole team of people using this strategy so that our students know that they are the CEO of their brains everywhere, not just in the classroom. They can use these strategies and be in charge of how they respond to their emotions everywhere.
And also, I like really what you mentioned, both of you, and which really comes through the book. And you mentioned it also in the book. It's really about empowerment. I think that's really the way in which we can empower, anyone. We have to help to really find their own tools in order to really bring to the very fore their very gift that they have. And I think an over reliance on, as you said, on counsel, that's fantastic if you have the money. I mean, it's always good, but there is also that there are a lot of problems there too. I mean, if you just have basically money and as you mentioned too, there is a certain aspect of life is really also about creativity. Life is really also art, right? And I think, and that's to some extent what it's more and more heeding to, because as we see more and more, there's so many tools now that AI can actually solve for us. And so these skills, this metacognition, social emotional learning, this in my view becomes and is already, in my view, to a large extent, one of the major currency in the present and really in the future. Because that's what you truly ultimately want. You want to have like people who somehow are able to connect with others, to make somehow a meaning of whatever they face in life. And that's really ultimately it comes down to the very basic of again being truly human. And I think it goes through through connection with others, but you can only do so when you really have the social emotional learning aspect to to think about your own inner world and inner being, and then you can ultimately adjust it and to the given situation and how your environment responds to it. So how do you see that also, more generally speaking, when it comes to education? Because I think really what you have done here with this book, it's really a blessing in so many ways, that more and more now we have actually the tools, and there are not necessarily any excuses anymore to apply it. Because and that's obviously too, it has to do with the culture, right? Some schools get it right. Of course, teachers are also very different, have also, you know, a lot of baggage, a lot of demands. It's hard. Life for everyone is tough. But usually, we also face to some extent this too, because we are all human, right? And we are always looking for shortcuts and some excuses to not to deliver. So how do you see that, generally speaking, that it is another accountability mechanism actually, not just for the kids and the families, but also for the staff, that will ultimately help the whole school and really community to walk towards the right direction?
Yeah, so there's a lot of angles and of course bias. I think that this can help in so many ways, right? And just kind of building off you had said from the last question about CEOs of our brains, and you had talked about the importance, for kids today. There's just so many tools that they have, right? And it's like how do you manage and deal with everything that the world is throwing at kids today? So I think it really helps to let them know that hey, your brain is a tool. It's a tool you can use to manage the outside world, as well as it's a tool you can, intentionally use to manage your inside world, right? And we talk to the kids a lot about how this is a strategy that, depending on the questions you're asking yourselves, it could help you look outward and make sense of the world and others and do problem solving. And we can talk about that and how that helps at the school level. But it all starts first with going inward, right? And so if you are emotionally charged up and you don't go inward and you don't manage your brain in order to help you process those emotions, get out of that amygdala, get out of fight or flight, right? If you don't do that, then, we got fight or we get avoidance, and neither are very good at schools. And or our emotions are charged up and we're not in a place to learn, right? So We need to go inward first and use our brain to help us manage what's going on inside our brains and inside our bodies. And then once we do that, we're in a much better place to understand others, to solve problems, to come up with creative solutions, as you mentioned, like being creative and solving problems in today's complex world sometimes just means, hey, let's step back. Let's think about all the possible ways in which we might be able to do this. Hey, let's try something different. Maybe let's try a new way of which to solve this problem that we're seeing right here. And when that happens, when that becomes, when everyone's doing that, when everyone's thinking that way, and everyone's responding that way, well, hey, let's calm down first and let's see if we can figure out a solution, right? Then the whole culture changes. And I'll just say, from my experience as a principal of many years, before implementing this strategy, teachers might come with real challenges that they would have teaching. And they might say, here's a problem I'm having. And then I would try to come up with a really creative solution to try to help them. And I would give them my solution. And then they'd be like, well, I don't really like that solution. And they might be mad at me. And so that would make me mad because I tried really hard to come up with a creative solution to help you with a problem that you had a hard time solving. And now you're mad because I made all that effort to help you. So, that was like a spiral of everyone sort of getting mad and problems, kind of overwhelming us. So when the norm changes and we're all like, okay, let's make sure we're emotionally ready to talk about this, to work this out. But there's also that habit of mind to say, okay, well, what are possible solutions? Is there something creative we can do here? When that becomes everyone's thought pattern, as a principal, then teachers started coming to me and said, hey, Rick, I noticed we're having this problem, but I was talking with everybody in the team and we think that this might be a great solution. What do you think? And I'd be like, that sounds great. I'd give a thumbs up. They'd go off and solve it and they'd be happy and I'd be happy. So it not only made us all feel really good, but it really made for a lot of really easier work on the part of the principal, at least, and I hope as well for the staff.
It definitely did. I can speak from the staff perspective since I was a part of it, but we would always say behind Rick's back, we're like, here's a problem. What are the different solutions we could come up with? And we would use it on ourselves. Here's our problem. What can we do about it? And then let's bring it to Rick. Because if we come up with a really good solution, chances are he's going to agree with it. But we would then use it, and it became such a great tool for us as staff. And Rick's had to help staff handle individual problems, and then Rick's had to help handle group problems at the staff level because a building of teachers can be challenging to manage. And using this strategy really helps narrow down and come up with the solutions when teachers are kind of put in a situation where nobody's going to give you the solution, right? Like there are plenty of times I went to Rick and I was like, just tell me what to do. Like, I don't know what to do. And he'd be like, well, what's the problem? How does it make you feel? What can we do about it? And I'd be like, okay. He's right. He was absolutely right. But it took me being put in that situation as a teacher to understand, like, okay, this is important for me to figure out on my own because I now need to become the CEO of my own teacher brain. And Rick's not always going to be in the building. The principal's not always going to be there to help me solve these problems. So I really need to understand how these situations make me feel, what these problems are, and how I can manage them on my own.
And I'll just add on to that. So now zoom into the classroom where the teachers had that experience as a professional and sees how much lighter the workload can be when that's the type of way we work together. And then now there's two students having a conflict in the classroom. The teacher is like, it's way better for me as a teacher to let the two students try to figure this out themselves. It's great practice for them to practice their strategy. It's great for me as a teacher to observe them using the strategy as a form of sort of informal assessment of their application of their learning and their strategy and their skills. And then it's just something less the teacher has to do. And so many times the students come up with a solution themselves, they solve it themselves. It's exactly what they need to be doing today. And the teacher didn't have to do anything. And in fact, the teacher feels great because, hey, they're learning and they're becoming more independent. And it makes for a calmer teacher. And then, of course, the more and more kids are regulating their emotions and working out problems in the classroom, it's a calmer classroom. And so that really does have a radioactive effect in a positive way in a classroom and in the school building, when everyone's using a strategy, they all know that they can use it. If they just keep trying and they just keep using it and they just keep working at it, problems will get solved and everybody will feel better.
Yeah, it's really critical, and I also think that that's also part of being a school is to, as you do, give the tools and strategies to kids to actually first and foremost try to solve the issues or the conflict at hand first amongst themselves, and then in case it's not resolved, a teacher, a mediator, or then the principal can come in and help somehow out the situation. So I think that's too, it's somehow again to look at these challenges in one way or another as an opportunity for really also students to actually grow and really learn and apply hands on what they were taught in terms of social emotional awareness. And just quickly dive a little bit into academic inquiry, because this is also something that you connected with social emotional learning.
Yeah, I love this question because this is really where the concept or the strategy of structured self questioning gets born. And ultimately, what happened was is as a principal in a elementary school in Red Bank, New Jersey, pre-K to third grade, our teachers were expressing challenges with student behavior and academic learning. And so I brought to them the research that's the crux of this book, the foundation of this book, that came from social and emotional learning curricula and social emotional researchers. And even kindergarten teachers, full day kindergarten teachers said, I don't have time to teach a curriculum for social and emotional skills. I've got to get the kids ready to read. I've got to get them ready for the state tests in third grade. And while it was shocking to me that kindergarten teachers are saying they did a full day kindergarten teachers said they didn't have time to address the social emotional because of the pressure of academics. Um, you know, but it was across the board. That was everybody. Everyone was telling me they didn't have time to explicitly teach social and emotional skills. So the idea came from talking with the researchers and the psychologists and said, if this works, if this strategy works to help kids make good solutions to social problems and come up with ways in which to solve their emotional problems, could this same strategy be used to solve academic problems? So just like kids would maybe follow the strategy to solve a conflict between two people, could they use it to solve a math problem? Could they use it to solve, analyzing a book that has a problem between two people and the process in which they solve problems? Could it be used for the scientific method to think through an inquiry? And that's where really things started to take off, where we realized that this is a way in which students it's a strategy to guide self talk through inquiries. It could be inquiry about ourselves. It could be an inquiry about a problem between us and a dear friend or a family member, but it also be an inquiry having to do with what's going on with the world, right? And so, this really took off where we encouraged sixth graders to use this structured self-questioning strategy with the steps and the self-questions to guide them through an inquiry about our town in social studies and language arts. And so it was, our town was building a lot of apartment buildings. And so we asked the kids to figure out, well, what might happen as we more urbanize our town? What's going to be the impact on our town if we have a lot more people living in it? And so they began to use the steps and the questions to guide their own research and to come up with their own solutions to what they thought might be a challenge to the wonderful town that they had and the culture that they had, or the services and the functioning of the town. And so we found that if they had, that guide to help them through this multi-step complex inquiry, they were a lot more successful than, a teacher guiding the students every step of the way, holding them hand by hand through complex research and the problem solving of complex social problems. And that's where we realized, and then we saw the test that year. First year we tried this approach as an academic process, we saw the students' test scores go way up when it came to research simulation tasks and their reading of informational text, which is areas that we had struggled in the past. So we saw how this was a helpful tool for them in the classroom, and it seemed like something that was helping them to learn academic skills, even beyond just the strategy itself.
This is really wonderful to hear, and I have no doubt that it actually works. So, just quickly a little bit to the process of writing the book. I can't imagine that it was very smooth because that's a collaborative work, and writing is not something that is easy, let alone in a team. So, how did this all play out? Because I was really impressed about the concise and really the ideas and how it was presented overall in the book. So please give us a little bit of taste how you personally, both of you, experienced that journey, because there is also to some extent, of course, a hierarchy which also can be potentially be tricky.
So this is a fun question. On one end, I would love to say there was some really juicy drama. It would be great TV and great, like for the entertainment value of this show. But it was surprisingly easy to write this book. A large part of the credit belongs to this is the second book of what is really a two-book series right now. Uh, where the first book was the metacognitive student from grades kindergarten through 12th grade. And we were very fortunate. I had for that book four other co-authors, so five authors for that book, just like there are five authors for this book. And when I began talking to other authors from Solution Tree or people that I knew that had success, they're like, you can never write a book with five people. Don't do it. It's suicide. But we were very fortunate that one of the writers was a professor of English at George Mason University by the name of James Savage, also a dear friend of mine. So a teacher, a college professor, a great writer. And so he really, in that first book, said he's going to take a step back, be very metacognitive about the process, created a structure that he thought was going to really work to tell the story. Because one was sort of storytelling as well as a how-to book. And I think he did a great job in sort of structuring not just each chapter, but then how the book was framed in and of itself. And then working with our editor, Todd Brocke from Solution Tree, who is just a genius, biased, but he's just been an incredible editor. We were fortunate to have the coaching support of some Solution Tree coaching writers as well. So that by the time we got to this book, with all the support from Solution Tree, with the model that we already had in place from James Savage's vision, it really was just sort of seeing the talents and the expertise that Katie and Michelle and Emily and Kelsey all had, and bringing that to a different. Let's say each had a chapter or two that they were able to take the format and then just sort of plug in their expertise and their experiences into that. There were some chapters where there was some overlap. This is where, as you mentioned wisely, that hierarchy can play a role. It was fortunate that I guess in some ways that not only was I an experienced author of this type of book, but I was also the boss of the co-authors at Moss School. And so if there was any real battles, I'll just be like, well, I think I'm going to take my authority here and I'll make the decision. And whether it was the right decision or the wrong decision, it definitely decreased any drama. And we were able to move forward pretty efficiently.
No opportunities for drama at all. We all are very close, the co-authors. So myself, Kelsey, Emily, Michelle, we're all close as teachers and, educators. And we all have a very good relationship with Rick, who taught us a lot about collaboration and accepting feedback as an opportunity to learn. So we really went into this process very prepared for what to expect. And I do think that it was wonderful. I mean, we all had our own chapters. We collaborated on chapters. We then took turns reading each other's chapters and giving each other feedback on that chapter. So it was a very, very collaborative process. And I think because of the structure that Rick came into this book with from the last book that he wrote, it made everything really smooth and gave us the foundation for having such a successful experience.
Yeah, it is. I can really tell this is just outstandingly written and so nicely also narrated, right? And it takes a lot. It's incredible to write a concise book. So kudos to really all of you. Now, what makes you feel alive?
Cool. Um, well, I know Rick and I talked about this question. We had talked about it and we're like, how are we going to answer this? Like what does make us feel alive? And I think I have two different answers, right? I think that in the context of this book, what makes me feel alive is just seeing this work not only come to life, but watching the way it builds over time. I have connections with students who I had 8 years ago when Rick and I first started using it. And to see the way that they still use it and are successful in the classroom and are having collaborative social experiences with their friends just from something that they started using when they were 3 is just beautiful to watch. And that makes me passionate about this and feel alive and want to keep doing it and tell people about it because it's so beautiful. And I think on a personal level, as a new mom, I love using this at home. My son is a baby, but by myself being a model for this strategy, not only are my parents learning more about this and how to be successful, but so is my husband. So now I'm using this incredible strategy to set my son up for success. And I am excited to see 10 years from now how this has helped him in his social experiences and in academic experiences and seeing how that works. And that makes me feel alive and really excited because I'm excited for him that he gets to learn this because so many kids before this have not had the opportunity unless they were in our school. So seeing that he's going to have the opportunity is just, it's incredible.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'll just say, this concept, a lot of this concept is found on research. It's a derivative from research, but I started playing around with this before even knowing about the research. I started when I started teaching in 1996. First year teacher didn't really know what I was doing, and I was having a hard time teaching my kids how to be math problem solvers or how to analyze text because I never really learned how to do that. I just solved math problems in my head, didn't know exactly how or why. It just came naturally. And with reading, I didn't really use techniques to analyze text. I just kind of comprehend. I was fortunate, but then trying to teach people, my students in 7th grade, how to do that, I really struggled. So I wanted to break it down and come up with a way which would really help students be thoughtful about how to solve a math problem or how to analyze text. And started coming up with just the guiding questions. Okay, well, what's the problem the math word problem is asking you to solve? And what do you know? And what can you do? And how can you solve it? And, I started to empower my students to use that in math class, as well as a lot of them are dealing with pressures of like gangs and drugs. And so it was like, well, how can you use these to help you figure out how to manage some of the challenges you're dealing with in life out on the streets? And so for me to see those students have done as successful as they were, that makes me feel alive. And so in talking about this with Katie today, I'm like, I really just I feel so great when I hear about my former students, when I see them on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook and seeing them doing well. So, right after we hung up, I'm like, I'm going to call some of my former students. And so I reached out and today I spoke with Josh Sanchez and he's going to be 40 soon. But it was amazing for me to hear about his successes and, what an incredible young man he's become. And so for me to see that impact and see how it has helped, people live even fuller lives, that definitely makes me feel alive.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. And one thing I really want to underline is you mentioned a lot of times modeling. And I think that's something that is really underestimated. Of course, modeling, it also comes from model, right? You got to be a role model. And, um, and that's not something very easy, but I think that's also important and a message really to any teacher or to anyone who really works in education and really beyond to really walk the talk. I think it's so much more effective, and not just the talk, because it just doesn't really um, go well if it's not really modeled, and if you not truly are the change that you want to see in the world. So thank you so much, Rick Cohen and Katie Upshaw, for being on the show. It's has been truly a blessing. And anyone who was listening and is listening, let's go now on solutiontree.com and grab and order a copy, the Metacognitive Preschooler, published by Solution Tree, because there is always a solution. Thank you so much, Rick Cohen and Katie Upshaw, for being here and your time.
Thank you so much, Yannick. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been wonderful.
Rick Cohen and Katie Upshaw. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.